Okay, good afternoon. My name is Heather Krause. I'm one of the 2 Deputy Assistance Directors here in the Air Quality Division at ADEQ. We wanted to thank you for joining us today. The purpose of this meeting is to discuss the proposed updates to the Yuma PM-10 Draft Agricultural Rule and to receive feedback from you, our stakeholders. This meeting is an opportunity for you to share your perspectives, ask us questions, and help us ensure that the proposed rule revisions are practical and aligned with protecting human health and the environment in Arizona. We will begin with a brief overview of the draft agricultural rule and the proposed revisions that are under consideration. Please virtually raise your hand at any time to provide your feedback so we can discuss it with you. And we have several rule writers on the call that can help address your questions, any questions that you may have. Your input is an essential part of shaping the final rule language, and we value your engagement in this process. So next up, we have some housekeeping pieces. Pass it over to Adam.
Yes, thanks, Heather. I'm Adam Ross. I'm ADEQ's technical lead on the PM10 planning effort for Yuma. Hopefully, everybody sees an interface similar to this one. Heather mentioned that if you would like to provide a question or comment, you should raise your hand. You can see that button in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, hopefully. You can also ask questions in writing. Oh, sorry, before we get to that, in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you should see a speech bubble icon where you can view chat messages. You should also see a gear icon where you can adjust your call settings. For instance, if you are having trouble hearing me, that's where you can adjust your audio settings. And then in the lower right-hand corner, if you'd like closed captions, you can enable those by clicking the CC button. That same speech bubble icon is where you can ask a text question if you would prefer that to asking your question verbally. If you do raise your hand in order to ask a question verbally, we will let you know when you should be able to unmute yourself. We'll call on you by name, and at that point, you should be able to click the microphone button in the bottom middle of your screen to do so. The first time that you provide a question or a comment, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, first of all by name, second of all, if you're comfortable doing so, by whatever organization you may represent, if any. And then thereafter, whenever you unmute, if you wouldn't mind, again, just giving your name to make things easier on our steno, Tara, that would be a big help. I think that's about it for housekeeping. Steve, if you'd like to take the floor.
Right. I'll be happy to. Let me first go ahead and share my screen. So, oops. Let me just back out of that for a second.
And in the meantime, if folks want to try out that chat button in the upper right-hand corner, there are some helpful links for today's workshop in there. Hopefully you can see them.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us on in this stakeholder meeting on the Ag B&P rule for the Yuma PM-10 Nonattainment Area. So I am going to go through some background information first before I dive into the rule language, and just want to emphasize that please don't hesitate at any point during the presentation to raise your hand or put in your question, and we'll try to call on you, basically right away. You don't have to wait until a topic is over or until we're at the end of the presentation. We're more than happy to engage with you in a conversation as the presentation goes along. Right. So first of all, just a little information about the stakeholder process. So as you'll see, we have 3 different rules in progress that we're working on and that are the subject of various stakeholder meetings. We have this rule for the agricultural sector in Yuma. We also have a rule for open areas, which are essentially vacant lots, although the term's a little broader than that, as well as paved and unpaved roads. So that's the second rule. And then we have another rule for the construction sector. The stakeholder process for the open area rule has concluded. We had one meeting on the construction rule last week. We're going to have the second one next week on the 20th. And then we'll conclude the stakeholder process with a second meeting on the agricultural rule in about 2 weeks. You can find information on both you can find the rules themselves as well as other stakeholder materials and information on the stakeholder meeting in the first link that's shown on that slide. And then the second link is to our official rulemaking page. And what's going to happen is that at the conclusion of the stakeholder process, we're going to prepare what's known as a notice of proposed rulemaking. So that will be our official rule proposal. And you'll be able to find that as well as other materials relating to the official rulemaking process on that second link. And we wanted, before actually making the official proposal, to engage stakeholders, get their input on draft rule language, so that to the extent possible, we can reflect that input in the proposed rule and not have to make many changes to the rule when we finally promulgate the final rule, because that can, if the changes are substantive in nature, that can sometimes require us to restart the rulemaking, and that would delay our progress in adopting the rules according to the schedule that we're trying to follow. We do intend to give you all feedback, all stakeholders' feedback on the comments and suggestions that we received during the stakeholder process, whether they come during these meetings or in writing. We are accepting written comments on the agricultural rule. I think it's until November 6th. Is that right, Adam?
Give or take a day, yeah.
Give or take a day.
Yeah.
Okay. So that would be our preference if for some reason you're not able to meet that deadline, but you think you have some comments that would be helpful for us in preparing the draft rule or the proposed rule, then please contact us and we can work that out. But it's not a hard and fast date. It's just a date that is consistent with the overall schedule that we want to pursue in terms of getting the proposed rule out before the end of this year. Right, so that is what we're doing in the stakeholder process. So now I'm going to go through some background on PM-10 nonattainment areas, and what has been going on with the Yuma PM-10 nonattainment area for those of you that haven't been involved in this issue previously. So first of all, the air pollutant that we're dealing with here is obviously PM-10, and that's defined as particulate matter which is finely divided liquid or solid material that can become suspended in the atmosphere and therefore inhaled by the public. And it's particulate matter with an aerodynamic diameter of 10 microns or less. And PM10 is known to cause a number of different health effects at sufficiently high concentrations, including irritation of the eyes, nose, and throat, coughing, shortness of breath, and fatigue, and worsening respiratory symptoms. And the diagram on the right is a scale comparison that can gives you an idea of the size of the particles that we're talking about. They're very small. As you can see, they're much smaller than a human hair or a particle of sand. And then the other form of PM10, which is not at issue in this rulemaking, is PM2.5, which, as the name suggests, is particulate matter with an aerodynamic diameter of 2.5 microns or less. So PM2.5 is a subset of PM10, but it's also treated for purposes of regulation under the Clean Air Act as a separate pollutant. And you can get an idea of how tiny PM2.5 is by looking at the diagram and seeing how it compares to PM10. So under the Clean Air Act, the Federal Clean Air Act, EPA sets standards for particulate matter and other pollutants known as the criteria pollutants that are known as the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, or as we pronounce it in the air quality field, the NAAQS. There are two forms of NAAQS. There is a primary standard that protects public health or is set at a level that is designed to protect public health with an adequate margin of safety. And then EPA is also supposed to set a secondary standard that protects public welfare. For example, visibility impairment, damage to vegetation, and architectural damage are some of the welfare effects that air pollution is known to cause. The secondary and primary NAAQS for PM10 is the same. It's 150 micrograms per cubic meter, and that is averaged over a 24-hour period. We have across the state a network of ambient monitors that determine whether areas of the state are in compliance with that standard. And the method for determining whether a particular area is in compliance is to look at how many exceedances or concentrations above the standard are measured at a particular monitor. And if there is more than one exceedance per year, that is considered a violation of the standard. In determining compliance, you average your values over a 3-year period. And so effectively, looking at a 3-year period, you're complying with the standard if you have 3 or fewer exceedances during that period, and you're violating it if you have 4 or more exceedances. So the Clean Air Act, for areas that are not complying with the NAAQS, the Clean Air Act establishes special planning requirements that a state has to satisfy in order to bring the area back into compliance with the NAAQS. And an area that fails to comply is known as a non-attainment area. And Yuma, unfortunately, is a non-attainment area for PM10. That's why we're all here working on these rules. It was designated as a non-attainment area in 1991 under the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990. So it's been a non-attainment area for quite some time. After Yuma was designated as a non-attainment area, the state submitted 2 non-attainment area plans in 1992 and 1994. As noted on the slide, EPA never took action on those plans. However, in 2006, EPA determined that the area was actually complying with the NAAQS. It made what is known as a clean data determination. And that was based on monitoring data that was collected during 1998 through 2000. And based on those 3 years of data, Yuma was experiencing less than or no more than 1 exceedance per year. And so EPA made a determination that we were complying with the NAAQS. The immediate consequence of that is that it suspends a number of obligations for non-attainment area planning under the Clean Air Act. So, for example, you don't have to submit modeling to demonstrate that you have a control strategy that will result in attainment in the future, because EPA has determined that you are complying right now in the present, and therefore there's no longer a need for that. And there's a number of other requirements that go away when you get this clean data determination. That determination, however, is not sufficient by itself to convert the area from a non-attainment area into an attainment area. There are a number of other steps that you have to go through under the Clean Air Act. And so the area did remain a non-attainment area after that clean data determination, because DEQ was not able to complete the remaining steps. And in any case, a few years later, the area once again started violating the NAAQS. At that point, recognizing the problem, we started to have a number of different stakeholder meetings and processes where we tried to address that issue and get it fixed without having to go back to non-attainment area planning. That was ultimately unsuccessful, and EPA in 2022 therefore rescinded the clean data determination officially, and then they made what's known as a SIP call, which basically was a direction to DEQ to restart the non-attainment area process, and required us to address all of those non-attainment area requirements that had been suspended by the clean data determination. And the SIP was due on December, I think, was it December 31st, 2023, I think?
It was in November of 2023 sometime.
November, okay. So we are past the deadline for submitting the SIP. Fortunately, EPA has not yet made a finding that we are past the deadline, which would have some unfortunate consequences under the Clean Air Act. But they required a SIP to be submitted by around the end of 2023 that would demonstrate, that would result in attainment of the NAAQS by December 31st of 2027. And so that is the kind of the target that we have now, is that 2027 date. And so we are working on developing a non-attainment area SIP for Yuma. That's the ultimate purpose of these rules that we're considering, including the ADEQ rule and the stakeholder process. And that plan has to meet a number of Clean Air Act requirements. First of all, it has to include reasonably available control measures for PM10. It has to demonstrate attainment by that December 31st, 2027 date. And in case we don't attain the standard by that deadline, it has to include contingency measures, which are additional PM10 controls that would kick in as soon as EPA made a finding that we had failed to attain by the 2027 deadline. So the first thing we needed to do, or one of the first things we needed to do in order to address those requirements, is to identify sources of PM10 emissions in the Yuma area that substantially contribute to PM10 concentrations. And we identified four, essentially. First of all, open areas, which again are pretty much vacant lots. Roads, both paved and unpaved, are another significant source. Those two are covered by a single rule. So we have a, go back here, okay. So we have the single open area and roadway rule. The other two are, of course, construction and agriculture. So with those sources identified, we have to develop, we have had to develop a control strategy that, first of all, satisfies that reasonably available control measures or RACM requirement for the significant contributors. It also has to, we also have to demonstrate that it will result in sufficient reductions in PM10 emissions to bring concentrations below the NAAQS, and it has to include contingency measures. So that's what these rules that we, these draft rules that we have been presenting to stakeholders are primarily designed to accomplish. A secondary purpose of the rules relates to something known as exceptional events. So under the Clean Air Act, monitoring data, you'll recall that we have monitors, including the monitor in Yuma, recording actual PM10 concentrations. But monitoring data that can be attributable to an exceptional event can be excluded in determining whether you are in attainment with the NAAQS. And we believe that a number of exceedances that have occurred over the years and are continuing to occur at Yuma are attributable to high wind events, and that they may be able to qualify as an exceptional event. And if we can have them qualify and have that data excluded, it will make it easier for us to demonstrate attainment of the NAAQS. The basic criteria for an exceptional event is, first of all, it has to be something that an event like in the case of Yuma, high winds that affects air quality. High wind results in much higher emissions of windblown dust, which is a form of PM10. It has to be not reasonably controllable, and it has to result from either human activity that's like a one-time activity, it's unlikely to recur, is the language used by the Clean Air Act, or it has to be a natural event, which is the one we would be relying on, or that high wind events are a natural event. For EPA's rules that the agency adopted under the exceptional event statute in the Clean Air Act provide that in the case of high wind events, in order to satisfy that second criterion that the event is not reasonably controllable, you have to have, the area has to have reasonable controls in place. So you have to have measures that are being implemented to reduce PM10 emissions, and most importantly for our purposes, those measures have to be enforceable or they won't be considered reasonable controls. And so that's another thing that we're trying to accomplish with these rules. We're trying to put control measures for PM10 into effect, make them enforceable so that EPA will consider that the area has reasonable controls and will agree in the future to exclude concentrations of PM10 due to high wind events from the record in determining whether we're in compliance with the NAAQS. And again, that will help us get ultimately an attainment demonstration or attainment determination from EPA, and would be the first step on our way towards actually becoming an attainment area. So that's a very important secondary rule, and EPA has told us in the past that what we have, the status quo, it does not satisfy that criterion. We need to have rules in place that actually require controls, which we haven't had up until now. And so we're trying to accomplish that with this proposed rulemaking. So in terms of our timeline, we have this this basic approach. So as I explained earlier, in order to officially demonstrate that you are in attainment with the NAAQS, you have to have 3 years of data because it's based on a 3-year average. And so we would have to have, if we wanted to demonstrate or actually attain in 2027, we would have to have 3 years of data from 25 and 26 and 27 with no more than 3 exceedances for that entire period. And we are not going to make it. We are already over that for 20, or we are fairly certain that we're not going to make it, because in part, at least because we are currently unable to make the exceptional events demonstration. However, if we can at least get a clean year in 2027, that is, if in 2027 there is no more than 1 exceedance of the 24-hour PM-10 NAAQS, then we can get what is known as an extension year. We can an extension for our attainment deadline we can get first 1 more extension year, and then if in that second year we also have no more than 1 exceedance, we can get a final extension year, and then by that point we would have the 3 years of data that would allow us to get a finding of attainment from EPA. And so in order to try to meet that goal, our ultimate goal in this rulemaking is to get rules in place that is actually adopted by sometime in the middle of next year, like the summer of 2026, so that we have time to have outreach with the regulated community in order to get the rules actually implemented, actually get controls in place by the beginning of 2027. And then we have a chance in 2027 to reduce emissions enough that, along with the ability then having the rules in place and hopefully EPA agreeing that they're reasonable controls, we're hoping that with that combination, we'll be able to get that clean year in 2027, get our first extension, then go on to get the second extension and get the final 3rd year of clean data so that we can get the Yuma area back into attainment with the NAAQS and ultimately redesignated to an attainment area. So before I go on to just the next subject, and then right after that, we'll get actually into the rule language. Does anybody have any questions about all that? I haven't seen any so far. Just want to make sure. Okay. All right. So one other item that I wanted to cover before diving into the rule is the Agricultural Best Management Practices statute and its relationship to the Yuma rules. As some of you I know are already aware, the state has a statutory Ag BMP statute that is in ARS 49457. And under that program, there is a body known as the Ag BMP Committee, which is made up of mostly representatives from the agricultural industry appointed by the governor, that adopts the rules for the agricultural sector. It is not DEQ that adopts the rules under the program. Again, it's this committee. That program applies to Maricopa County, first of all, and it also applies to PM-10 nonattainment areas designated after July 1, 2009. And as you might recall, I told you earlier that Yuma was designated as a nonattainment area way back in 1991. So that program is not applicable to Yuma. So the rules for the ag sector that are being adopted by Yuma are being adopted by DEQ, not by the committee. However, we have in the past, and we're continuing to do this in this rulemaking. We are largely modeling the Ag BMP rules that the committee adopted in the past rules that have been adopted for Yuma for the ag sector, and in the amendments to the existing rule that we are proposing this time around. And in particular, we've been using the rules for the West Pinal County non-attainment area. I do want to mention that although we are generally taking that approach, we recognize that the Yuma rules do not necessarily have to be the same or as stringent as the West Pinal rules, because the West Pinal County is at this moment a serious non-attainment area, and Yuma is a moderate non-attainment area, which is what we're trying to keep it. Another objective of this process is to prevent Yuma from becoming a serious non-attainment area. And so if anyone believes that we have elements in the draft rules that are not appropriate for a moderate non-attainment area, that is something that we have been more than happy to consider in past discussions with the industry in Yuma, and we'll also be happy to consider during the stakeholder process. All right, so that is the end of the slide presentation. So I think I'm going to have to switch. Let's see, yeah, let me. Switch over to sharing the rule language. All right, so this is the draft rule language. It consists of amendments to the existing rules at R18.2, 613, and 613.01 that we shared on our website for this stakeholder process. And we received some early feedback from Harold Maxwell about these rules, which we very much appreciate. It's the earlier we can get feedback, the better. So we were very happy to get that. And I have added notes to the draft rules that reflect his feedback, so that as we go along, we can discuss the questions and comments that Harold raised. So we have two sections of the rules. First, we have definitions in 613, and then in 613.01, we have the actual best management practice rules. And because we ended up making pretty extensive revisions to the actual BMP rule 613.01, rather than present it as strikeout of some language and keeping other language, which turned out to be extremely messy, we've drafted it as just entirely new language, but so that you have a point of reference that you can compare to the old rules, we include the existing rule language in the draft. But let's start with the definitions. And so just an overview of these, most of these definitions are definitions of best management practices for controlling PM10 or fugitive dust emission from agricultural activities. And so, for example, access restriction is a BMP, aggregate cover is a BMP. And then later on, as you'll see in the rule, We have a number of different agricultural activities that require the commercial farmer to employ BMPs or a BMP to reduce emissions, and these individual BMTs are then presented as basically a menu for the particular farmer to choose from. We have a list of, say, 5, 6 different BMPs for a particular activity, and the regulated commercial farm can choose any one of those as the method that it will employ in order to reduce PM10 emissions, and then to determine like what that BMP consists of, what exactly you have to do, you would refer back to these definitions. And it's here in particular that we updated these definitions to reflect the latest changes to the rules for West Pinal. So that is where you see strikeout and underlining, strikeout to show deleted text, underlining to show new text. That's where most of this is coming from. It's to try to make, to the extent it makes sense. Again, we recognize there may be reason not to follow the other rules exactly, but to the extent it makes sense, try to keep the Ag BMP rules in the state consistent. So for the definitions, I think it probably makes sense just to go page by page and see if you all have any comments or questions. We already have one from Harold. And so Harold's comment on cessation of night tilling, which again is one of the BMPs, is that eliminating night tillage the night before a high wind event, because that's where this BMP is used. It's used in the context where you're required to do it the night before if you select it, you're required to do it the night before a high wind event. Harold says that needs to be talked about. We till at night because of the moisture in the air and lack of wind limits, dust drift. Our biggest concern is that we have ordered water for a specific field a week to 10 days before we get it. If the water is coming for a field that needs the final tillage completed before it arrives, we have lost the flexibility to work all night before the high wind event shuts us down. So I think we understand that comment. One thing I want to note about this is that we wanted to discuss about this is, as I noted before, the BMPs, none of the BMPs are necessarily required. Like nobody is required to choose cessation of night tilling as a BMP. There are other options that are available. So if, for the reasons Harold provides, night tillage doesn't work for some operators, or even the vast majority of operators, as if it does work, if it's a possible option that some operators might be interested in, then it would still make sense to include it in the rule. For all of these BMPs, of course, we're also willing to consider ways to make them more flexible or more consistent with the way you operate in Yuma. But this seemed to be a comment that was directed more at the feasibility of employing this BMP at all. And so while we understand the concerns that are expressed, we don't really see the need to just remove it from the rule entirely. Again, since it's an option, it's not a requirement. So we have so we have a hand raised.
Yeah, we have a question or a comment from David Sharp from the Yuma Farm Bureau. David, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me in. First of all, you said in your previous slide that Yuma is very different, does not need to have the same restrictions, the same everything that West Pinell County has, and yet you keep referencing that you want to make things uniform throughout the state. We have a problem with that. Unfortunately, Harold, he's online, but he, for whatever reason with his phone, he's not able to raise his hand and all. So he and I are passing those back and forth, and he and I spent about 3 hours going over this, but I'd like to go back to number 1 because we skipped over that. In that you have several things there in number 1 that bothers us. You refer to commercial farm roads. We need to know what commercial farm roads are. And then this physical barrier, we have a real problem with that because we're constantly farming day and night, and having physical barriers is a big issue. Why can't we just use signage? And I'll wait for your response.
I believe, let's see, so this would be for cropland, oh, commercial farm roads.
If you don't mind if I jump in, Steve.
No, go ahead, Adam. Yeah, I just wanted to check to make sure that signage was not an option, and yeah, it's under the rule. It doesn't appear to be.
If I recall correctly, we had received comments on a previous draft of the rule indicating that signage was typically not effective at restricting access to private farm roads. Is that accurate? Either David or anyone else who has experience with
Well,
this?
if I might, we've had numerous discussion about all these, and I thought we kind of had a pretty good handle on all this prior to seeing this document. We did admit that signage can be problematic, and that if somebody knocks a sign down or something, yes, but to try to put up a physical barrier, such as if you've got a farm with a district lateral that runs through the middle of your farm, that district lateral cannot be blocked. That has to have access both to the district and to other growers that are either above or below you that need to have access to that lateral. And you start putting up physical barriers, that's quite problematic and not acceptable. Signage is really the only thing that is really acceptable. Yes, you do run the risk of somebody removing a sign or whatever, but that happens on state and county roads as well. But physical barriers are just not an option.
When you say, David, that signage is the only acceptable measure, do you mean in order to achieve access restriction? Because for the portions of the rule where this BMP is referenced, there are other options provided. It's never necessary uniquely to achieve access restriction for a given road. There are always other BMPs that one could select for a given commercial farm road besides access restriction.
Understand the issue when this is number 1, and this starts the whole thing off with this manner of speaking. We raise concerns, but anyway, you know our concerns, you know what we're after, and we would like to see this changed or modified or better clarity when we come back for the next meeting.
Yeah, so we'll work on making sure there's a clear definition for commercial farm roads, but because this isn't unique to the road dust controls, this applies to almost every section of the draft rule. Since it is a menu-based rule, or since in general each provision or each requirement is menu-based, if one of the BMPs, or even if several of the BMPs on the given menu are impractical or impossible to implement in a particular situation, there should always be enough other options that one of them is appropriate. So in this case, for instance, something like watering that road, if access to
Well,
it
understand
cannot
our
be,
concern. Once something is put in writing, it's virtually impossible to change. And when it's stated the way this was stated in writing, uh, you could never be modified. And if all of a sudden the other rules are not acceptable and we have to go to this rule, that puts a burden on us.
Yeah, we can't tailor these rules to, I mean, I guess if you're telling us that it's not practical for anybody, it's a useless BMP because it's one nobody would ever adopt, then that's something we might consider. But if it's an option for anybody, then we're not going to omit it just because of camel's nose under the tent.
Okay.
Concerns.
Well, we've expressed our concern. We'll move on.
Well, but again, if like you think that it's totally useless because again, nobody would ever want to use it, then that's something we would consider. There's no point in us including a BMP.
Well, there's places where it just won't be able to be used.
Places,
and as long as it's menu driven, as long as it's menu driven, but my problem is something gets put in writing, it's hard to ever get it changed.
Well, that's not really, I mean, it's hard, but not, can be hard. It's not impossible. And so,
and remember that
again, that's very,
not all the road dust is created by farm roads. A lot of it's created by public roads, and it's not always traffic on the farm that creates this dust.
Well, we're very aware of that, and that's why we have a public road rule as well as an ag rule.
Okay.
And just to go to your other more general point about consistency between this rule and the others, I did say that we are totally willing to consider changes to this rule that are appropriate for Yuma and not for other areas. That we are not wedded to all of this language, but in general, we believe it's good administrative practice to the extent it makes sense, to the extent it's feasible, have consistent rules for the same sector. So, again, if you have particular BMPs that you think are too much for Yuma because it's a moderate area, or not appropriate for Yuma because of the particular circumstances or characteristics of the area, we are more than happy to consider making changes.
Okay, thank you. We will keep that in mind and keep working with you.
And I believe we do. I know about the commercial farm. I don't have it flagged here, but I did flag that later in the rules, as well as I think the other issue. So, oh yeah, about how you block access. But the way, all right. So, are there any other comments on this initial page of definitions? All right, let's move to the second. And we have a couple of additional comments.
I'm sorry, Steve.
Yeah.
We do have a question from
I'm
Bobby
sorry.
McDermott. I'm not sure if she'll be able to unmute, but you can take a crack at it now, Bobby. If yep, great. Please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. This is Bobby McDermott. I spent 38 years working here in Yuma County as a soil conservationist. So I go back to your introduction. Once again, has EPA indicated why all of the discussions we've had what their problem is with the way we plan to handle the PM10. I've asked that question at meetings now for 40 years. And also, you say that this is not tailored, but it is. You're trying to tailor us to Pinell County, and which is a dying agricultural area for lots of reasons, mainly water, but that's not us. And one of the things that would make it much more practical to look at these BMPs in relation to what you have listed in your concerns is make a chart with all the concerns listed, and under each one, all of the BMPs that could apply to it. Then we can look across the problems and see if, say, limited access is not part of it. We're not going to worry about it. But this is I've spent quite a bit of time looking at this since I got it, but I only, only recently was it sent out. But there are so many things that do not apply at all to Yuma County. I don't care what you're farming or where you're farming. They just don't apply. And why can't we get a list of all of the things that just do apply to Yuma County? And then see if there's something maybe that some other area uses successfully. We've been farming an awful long time, and we know what works. And so I just feel that we've even muddied the waters more with this particular presentation. And that's my comment. Thank you.
Well, I guess I don't, so I'm sorry, Bobby, is your objection that we include on the list BMPs that don't work for Yuma County and therefore they should be eliminated from the list? Or is it the way specific BMPs are defined that don't work in Yuma County?
Well, both of those, because we seem to have lost all logic to talk about wetting ground before you do tillage as if it is somehow practical anywhere in the world, but certainly not in Yuma County. I mean, there are so many things that are in these pages that nobody does. So why can't we throw them all out and start with what we know works? And then if we need to add others, we'll look at some others. Mm-hmm. But every farmer can tell you going through this, what works and what doesn't, and there are no miracle cures. So, but going through this line by line, page by page, it's very repetitive. Sequential cropping is a cropping system. Crop residue is listed in 3 or 4 different types of wordages. All this is total frustration for those of us who live here and are trying to utilize and help this PM10 situation. Yeah. As I said, I started in 1980 in the governor's office on PM10. We haven't gotten anywhere. And why is it that you keep, it may not be you, it may be the system, but why is there no recognition of the very different farming conditions? Continual irrigation, Dave talked about closing off roads. Every irrigation district has main laterals. Every district has ditch riders who move water around physically. They're out 24 hours a day. You can't expect we use them to be stopping and opening a gate or preventing moving something out of the way so they can make it from one water change to the next. You know,
So,
go ahead.
yeah. So one thing I point out is, in terms of where this comes from, a lot of this language comes from the AG BMP committee, which is made up of representatives of, as well as a few others, but it's mostly made up of representatives of the agricultural community. So that's where a lot of this specific language came from. In terms of what EPA's issues are, its primary issue at the moment is the enforceability of the rules. So, which is addressed in, later on in, forget which section, but the section that now would, under our amendments, require you to submit your form and your certification to DEQ.
And with that, Steve, who is going to administer it? Are you going to have people in Yuma coming around, our neighbors reporting neighbors? What is the enforcement action on these BMPs? How is it enforced in
So
Pinal County?
at the moment, we rely everywhere, Yuma, Pinal, Maricopa County, primarily on complaints. We have, and I don't think it's, as you say, your neighbors that are reporting you, but I think it's other people. Well, maybe your neighbors if they're residents, not farmers, complaining about excessive dust, come to our office, and then we would send an inspector out to look at it. We will need to do more than that in the future. We'll probably have to have regular inspections of farms. That doesn't mean one per farm every year, but some form of regular inspection.
But how does an inspection work if you're only there one day?
Well, the inspector would look, first of all, they would have your BMP form. They would look at what activities you're engaged in on a particular day and whether you're actually implementing the BMP that is noted on your form. And they would typically ask to look at your records.
So is there a form that I read this? I was very concerned about everything shall be. That's no choice. But does a farmer then have to submit a form every day if what he's doing in the field?
Oh, no. You only submit the form once a year.
So again, how does an inspector inspect anything other than the actual?
The same way they inspect everything under our program. We don't have inspectors on the ground at facilities 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We send them out periodically to look at a snapshot of time, look what a facility is doing at a particular time, and is what it's doing consistent with the requirements that apply to it on that day. If it's not doing activities on that day that are subject to requirements, then there's no way for the inspector to make that determination for those requirements. They would look only at the activities that are actually being engaged in at a regulated facility and compare it to, for every other regulated source. It would actually be a permit that we had issued to them that would specify in very great detail what the requirements are. In this case, they would be comparing what you're doing to a form that you fill out that selects which BMPs you intend to implement at your facility for particular areas and at particular times.
So it would have to be field by field?
If they have it might be, depending on the farm. I guess
farm thousands of acres. How
well,
practical is this? For the farmer, how many people is he going to have on staff just to try and file the form? I'm sorry, you know, we've been over this and over this and over this.
Well,
And
you
it
have
doesn't
the
seem to.
the form is
doesn't-
Bobby, the form is an existing requirement. That is a requirement under the only thing the thing we're changing is you have to submit it to EEQ, but you're required to submit a form now.
And how has that form been used?
Well, we don't right now. DEQ doesn't use it at all because we don't get it. We as a, you know, again, one thing that's been to Yuma's advantage in our approach of following what the Ag BMP committee does is that we have not required Yuma, because it hasn't been required in Pinal or Maricopa County. We have not required Yuma farmers to submit their form to DEQ. They just have to have it on site. But that's going to need to change for Pinal County, and we're also changing it for Yuma because we don't think we have an enforceable program without the form being submitted to DEQ.
How many BMP committee people are from Yuma County?
I am not aware of that. I don't know if is Heather on?
Who's
Yeah,
Heather?
I'm here.
Oh,
hi.
Okay.
Hi,
Okay.
Bobby. I can take a look at our Ag BMP committee list and get back to you.
Okay, but you know, I attend Farm Bureau meetings and things like that, and I've never heard of anybody that's been on the BMP committee. So if indeed this is our best shot, then we need to start over again and get some people from the area to talk about this stuff in the committee and see whether you know, some bigger changes need to be made.
Well, I just wanted to go back to a specific. You talked about how it's not feasible to wet the soil before tillage. I just wanted to point out that that's not new in these amendments, that we've added more detail, but previous rule had tillage based on soil moisture as a potential BMP. And it was defined to mean, if you ignore the new language and read the stricken language, it's defined to mean applying water to soil before or during tillage, or delaying tillage to coincide with precipitation. And what we now have is, and it may be that these percentages, I know that we had a comment that the percentages are unreasonable, and so that's something we're willing to consider. But this is not a brand new requirement. We added some detail to it from the Pinal County rule, and that goes back to the other earlier objection or concern that had been expressed with EPA for the Maricopa County and West Pinal rules, was that the BMPs were too vague. They were so open-ended and broad that you really wouldn't be able to determine whether somebody was in compliance with them. And so some years ago, the West Pinal and Maricopa County rules were amended to add more detail to the definitions of the BMPs so that it would be possible to assess whether a farmer was in compliance with them. And again, those were rules adopted by the Ag BMP committee, not by DEQ.
Yeah, it's just, again, going to an area that farms very basic crops to an area that grows 175 different crops every year, it seems illogical that, you know, that we don't get to have practical, applicable BMPs that fit our area, that we have.
The BMPs, yeah, I mean, we're happy to consider it. If you can identify BMPs, specific BMPs that you don't think are practical, and what changes could be made to make them more practical for Yuma, we're more than happy to consider that. But we're not starting over. That's not an option. You know, if we start over, we are not going to get to the finish line when we need to. And the result of that will be that Yuma will be found not to be in attainment and will be reclassified to serious, and even stricter requirements will apply.
I'd like to try
Okay,
to.
okay.
Um,
Do you have you published a new BMP handbook for farmers?
I am not certain.
I haven't seen one for 15 years. So you say that you changed things for Pinal County and whatever. Was anybody else ever notified of that?
We have Lisa raising her hand. Can we let Lisa? I think she probably has information on that.
The guidebook, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Lisa, we can hear you.
Okay. The guide was revised for Maricopa County, and I believe there is a guide for Pinal, but it was not updated for Yuma because none of those changes applied to Yuma, because Yuma is not part of the jurisdiction of the committee. Therefore, it wasn't even thought of probably.
Okay, so if Yuma wasn't part of the jurisdiction of the committee, how in the world would we have had any input?
You have had input, but only for Yuma County.
Well, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
This is what I wanted to touch on. The references to trying to keep things consistent with the agricultural BMP rules that fall under the committee's jurisdiction is not necessarily reflected in the lists of individual BMPs. Most of the BMPs that we're looking at here are taken from the existing Yuma rule.
Mm-hmm.
What we want to make consistent is the enforceability of the rule. And Bobby, you asked this question in writing. I apologize for not answering it in writing, but the feedback that we've received from EPA, effectively the reason that regulatory credit is not already being taken for the existing Yuma rule is because EPA doesn't consider it enforceable as written. And so the majority of the changes that we're suggesting in this draft, in order to make this rule more in line with the changes that Steve's describing for instance, the West Pinal BMP rule, are structural enforceability changes, not changes to the individual BMPs or the BMPs that are available. Again, for the most part, we're trying to keep that as consistent as possible with the existing Yuma rule, except to the extent that we need to clarify definitions, for example. And so some of these definitions have changed. We're certainly open to discussing the changes in those definitions. But for the most part, what we're trying to do here in order to get statewide consistency is to make the rules enforceable so that we can take regulatory credit for the controls that are being used.
That, you know, I'm sorry, Adam. It just doesn't compute. You know, we seem to just be going in circles about this. If you're already not checking or enforcing BMPs in Maricopa and Pinal County. How do you know that your system is working there? And basically, what you're bringing it to us as something we need to do. And like I say, with nobody from Yuma on that committee, I just find it hard to believe that you can have a whole lot of faith in the decisions that were made by people who aren't in the game.
I think I get what you're saying, and the types of enforceability elements that I was referring to, for instance, the annual submission requirement for the form that Steve mentioned earlier. The reason,
Go ahead.
go ahead. So the reason that that is considered an important element for enforceability, not just here, but also in the committee's jurisdiction, is based on conversations that we've had with EPA regarding what they would consider an enforceable rule. It wasn't like the brainchild of the committee, if that's your concern.
Well, no, I mean, okay, so do we have anything from EPA in writing that tells us what they feel an enforceable rule is? What they feel that enforcement looks like?
So we have, we have a number of things in writing. There, unfortunately, the most specific direction we received from them was in a meeting, and they indicated that submission of the form to DEQ was what they were looking for. And honestly, that is the very least stringent thing they could have asked for us. They could have, based on other actions that they have taken in other jurisdictions that have BMP-like programs, where they have asked for so much more in terms of enforceability, including in Imperial County, California. They told Imperial County, based on a program that they had approved for the San Joaquin Valley, that they needed to have the local air pollution control district actually review and approve their forms, just like a permit, before they could operate. That is not being asked of you. The only thing that's being asked is that you fill out this form, which you're already required to fill out, and then the additional thing is submitted to ADEQ. That is the change.
Okay, most of the end of the under the revision is all about enforcement. You know, I ran off all of the practices from NRCS and whatever, and most of these things I've never heard of, and I worked in it a long time, but you know, irrigating fields to depth of proposed cut and fill before you go ahead on land level. Well, thank God we don't have a lot of land leveling, because this would never work, because you don't take into account the shrink swell of the soil, the type of soil, how much excess you need to have. You wet the soil, you've totally changed how much dirt you need to move. You know, I've done a hell of a lot of land leveling, and it just, yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. I'll back off. Go ahead.
This is an important point, Bobby. Thank you for bringing it up. Again, that the BMP that you're describing is an option on a menu. So in circumstances where that option is not appropriate, one of the other options on the menu should be used instead. If it's the case that absolutely no one in the entire non-attainment area would ever want to use that BMP under those circumstances, or would ever want to use that BMP at all, we could remove it from the menu.
Mm-hmm.
But anytime we remove an option from one of these menus, that's just going to make the rule more restrictive. So we do understand the concerns about some of the individual BMPs not being usable under certain circumstances, and that's why, well, I wasn't there when the rule was initially written, but I assume that's why this menu-based approach was taken, to afford flexibility to the folks who are doing the work and know what makes sense for their individual farms. So I just want to remind the folks looking at the rule that these are menu-based requirements. If one option isn't good for a particular circumstance, there are other options available. And George has been waiting very patiently, but before that, I thought I saw on his hand up when we were talking about the committee. Did you have anything that you wanted to add at this point? Yeah, okay. Go ahead.
Yes, Adam, Anna with Arizona Farm Bureau. I just wanted to note that you can find, or folks, if they want to see the other guides, they are on the Department of Agriculture's website. Yuma's is there, Maricopa's there, Pinal is there.
Thanks.
I just want to note.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was there something else?
Nope, I just want to make note that's where they can be found.
Thank you very much. Okay, George, thanks for your patience. You should be able to unmute.
Thank you, Adam. This is George, Yuma County Development Service. Going back to this Ag BMP committee, I have to question, again, the effectiveness of the measures that are developed within this committee, and to the areas or jurisdictions where this committee is applicable to. Again, how effective has it been? Because Maricopa and others are still in non-attainment status, and it almost seems like there's going to be this heavy reliance on the exceptional event rule. And I've questioned in the past in previous stakeholder meetings, Maricopa is still in serious non-attainment. Is it just a matter of submitting exceptional event demonstrations to get by and have a continuous control measure or even contingency measures or even being bumped up to serious for Yuma County? Is that what we're facing here?
So the two counties are, although they're both serious, they're in very different circumstances. So Maricopa County, the problem, as I understand it, and again, not again, but we do not have planning jurisdiction over Maricopa County. That is handled by the Maricopa Association of Governments. We do serve as, the Ag BMP committee does adopt the ag standards for the area as they do for West Pinal, but we don't prepare the plan, but we do have interaction with MAG. And our understanding, and Heather, you might know more about this, but is that the problem in Maricopa County is that there are one or two monitors in tribal land that show exceedances that if you exclude those, that the area actually has been attaining the NACs. Even with those, their number of exceedances are very low, but they have, we really don't have any ability to intercede on tribal land and regulate there, and EPA has not done anything to address that situation. But Heather, I think maybe I'm putting that correctly.
Yeah, and in addition to those, a couple of monitors, there's one in southern part of Phoenix that is currently having some exceedances as well.
Okay.
So there's going to be a little bit of time before that area can seek to get a clean data determination.
Yeah. And then West Pinal's problem is much more serious. They continue to have repeated very high exceedances of the PM-10 NACs, particularly at a monitor known as Hidden Valley, which does appear to be impacted primarily by agricultural sources. And personally, I would agree with you, George, that the program hasn't been effective. There, primarily because in its current state, it's not enforceable. It's basically all those farms, because of the way the program was structured by the committee, are anonymous to us. We don't get their forms. We don't, in order to see a farm's form, we have to request it, and normally that happens on a complaint-based inspection. So we need two things, really. We need a more enforceable form of the program, and we need to have a more robust compliance and enforcement program for Ag B&P, both in, we really need that for West Pinal. We're going to need that to some extent in Yuma, but we can't, like, the answer is not, well, the Maricopa County program or the Pinal County program isn't working right now, so let's not do this at all. Like, that's not an option for us. What we need to do is improve the existing programs so they are effective, so that they are enforceable and therefore are effective.
And do these jurisdictions, again, just based off the exceptional event rule, do you know if they are constantly submitting demonstrations to EPA? If the event meets the criteria.
Maricopa County has, I'm not sure the most recent, but Maricopa County has submitted some exceptional event demonstrations that EPA, I believe, has concurred in for PM10. They're not constantly doing that, but it has occurred in the past. West Pinal, there's no, they don't, we don't. I think we would be the ones who would be submitting the demonstration for Pinal County. That's something we do have responsibility for, although we don't do the planning. And we haven't, because there's no point. You only submit exceptional event demonstrations if by having the data that you want excluded, it has a regulatory impact, meaning it brings you into attainment. And in West Pinal, you could probably exclude a dozen exceedances, exceptional events, and they would still be violating the standard. So there's no point in submitting exceptional event demonstrations for them. And, you know, I think used properly, exceptional events make sense, because what they're supposed to be for is circumstances that are beyond your control as an air pollution control agency. They're, you know, supposed to reflect natural events or kind of unique circumstances that you can't really plan for. And so, and one of those is high winds, where, you know, if the winds are sufficient, no matter what measures you've taken to stabilize soils and reduce your activity, you're going to end up with concentrations exceeding the PM10 NAAQS. And so if you can meet that standard, then you get the data excluded. But it's not like just a get out of jail free card for everything. That there, you know, specific criteria that you have to meet, including, as we discussed at the beginning, having reasonable controls in place to try to, even if you can't eliminate the violation, at least mitigate the emissions and reduce the level of the concentration and the exposure to the public.
That's it. Thank you, Steve, for the explanation. That's all I have for now.
You know, there's been a tremendous amount of work done down here by Harold and David and Art, and we've vectored our winds, and we've done all of this stuff that proves that, again, Yuma County is only 7% private land. So essentially 98% of whatever's up in the air is an exceptional event because we irrigate everything, and or coming off of public lands, Native American, you name it. It just, again, where is the common sense of what's happening to Yuma County? You know, we just got through a period where some areas got 6 to 10 inches of rain. We can't do a damn thing with anything until it dries out. And then once it dries out, it'll be planted and it'll be sprinkled, or it'll be under irrigation. You know, we don't have events that just pop up off of our farm fields. It just doesn't happen. If we have exceedances other than when the monitor was in a construction area where they were rebuilding the streets and we exceeded. You know, I don't know if Yuma still only has one monitor, which is in the middle of the urban area. Why is it there? You know, why isn't it moved to a place that maybe could logically tell what's happening with the PM-10 and where it's coming from? But it's just incredible the amount of time and effort that we all have put in. And for us, I've lived here now 55 years, we can't defend ourselves. It's just like a brand new city council ordinance. It's called click and fix. You can go on the computer and you can report something you don't think is right. It's totally anonymous. Somebody gets attacked by one of the local agencies. You don't know why you've been attacked. You don't know what the problem was, but you have to fix something that you didn't even know was wrong. And that's kind of where we're at. We keep getting attacked with PM-10, but it's not our fault. And why is that so obvious to us and not to anybody else? And you know, I understand everybody has a job description and what they're supposed to be doing, but how has it helped us to spend 40 years on this topic?
Well, I mean, I'm going to want to turn to Adam to talk a little bit about why we are addressing agriculture as one of the sectors in these rules. It's, you know, there is a reason for that. But in terms of the long period of time that has gone by and all the work that's been done, none of that has resulted in any new rules, in any new control measures, in anything to address the PM-10 problem. We, you know, at DEQ, we spent years, not me personally, but I know like Lisa has spent years having discussions with Yuma stakeholders, trying to get reasonable controls in place so that we could get exceptional event demonstrations done, all to no avail. We, you know, weren't able to get agreement on anything, weren't able to get rules in place. And that's why we ended up with a rescission of the clean data determination, a SIP call, and why we're having to do this work, because we couldn't get anything done earlier.
Steve, this is David Sharp. You've just got under my skin, and I take exception to what you just said. Okay. I think even though Art Allen, Harold Maxwell, and David Sharp a long time ago were labeled as butt heads by ADEQ, we have worn that proudly. We have spent hours working with you guys, trying to explain what we do here in Yuma County, how we do it, and how we're different than Maricopa and Pinal. I used to farm in Maricopa. I know what Maricopa is like. I used to live there. I used to farm there. I didn't ask for 7 million more people to come into this state and screw it all up. When I lived in Maricopa, we had clean air, but yet we had way more farms than we have today. That aside, we have spent hours going over these rules, and we've tried to come up with things that we can agree on. And guess what? We have agreed on some of those things, and we've implemented some of those things. Over the 30 years that we've been doing this, we have talked to our neighbors and all in Yuma County and said, these are the things that we need to do to try to make it look like ag is working to clean things up, that we're working to be a part of the solution rather than part of the problem. We have implements now that do multiple passes in one. We do everything with GPS, so to cut down the number of passes and to be more efficient. We have engines that are all running on DEF, which is clean air. I can go on and on and on with the list. Many of these things came out of our discussions that we've had over the years with your predecessors and others. So don't come here and say that we haven't been working with you and trying to come up with an answer, because damn it, we have been trying to come up with an answer.
I'm not saying you haven't been working. You haven't been working.
All we see right now is you're trying to come up with a punitive solution that you can slap us with a fine rather than coming to us and sitting down and coming up with a reasonable solution. And I have said my piece, and I'll let it go at that.
What we're trying to do right now is come up with a reasonable solution. If you don't like specific BMPs, if there are other aspects of the rule that you don't like, that you don't think will work for Yuma, now is the time to tell us.
Okay. All right. If that's the case,
And,
let's look
and
at
we have your input from the email. If there's additional input, we're happy to hear it. But I didn't say that people didn't work with us. I said that the work that was done didn't result in.
That's not the way I took it. Adam Harold would like to speak if you could unmute him.
I'm assuming, Harold, that you're calling in separately from your connection.
He's on an iPad in Texas at the moment, and he is not able to raise his hand. So if you could unmute Harold Maxwell on an iPad, he could speak.
Yay, there we go.
Oh, okay, great.
It worked. Thank you. You know, this is part of our concern to start with, because having worked on getting the BMPs put together extensively, when we got this latest revision, and of course we got it late, and I understand things come out late sometimes, there were some pretty radical changes in there that weren't in the list that we sent out to all our Farm Bureau members, with the forms we sent out to our Farm Bureau members. They were pretty different. And so, you know, what we thought the first thing should be would be to sit down and make sure we got agreement on definitions. You know, because we've had the discussion over the years about it not being practical to put barricades on the farm roads. But part of our problem, that's one of the reasons it was in the initial deal, was that there were tons of county, city, Bureau of Land Management, water district, all these other roads that are out there in the rural areas that are not farm roads. They are not a private road owned by, say, David Sharp. And we've been actively on those roads, controlling dust through watering and everything else, because the county can't afford to go and pave every road in Yuma County. And so, you know, we need to understand that, because part of when we start looking at stuff, if we're getting hit for dust creation because the amount of roads and also the assumed traffic on those roads is out of proportion, then, you know, we're not getting the bang for the buck to make the modeling work, right? I mean, we got to get it accurate on that. We were hoping is that we could sit down with the definitions and go through them and say, okay, why are we striking? Let's just take the very first. Why are we striking signage? You know, I agree. Not everyone's going to want to put a barrier on the road. Not everyone's going to want to put a signage on the road. But that doesn't mean that someone won't utilize that. And so we look at those things and to understand the ag BMPs. But, you know, it was pretty radically different. You know, I mean, there's I'm not going to say that. It was enough different that it was a concern that we needed to talk about. Then we could look at some of this other stuff that's coming in, and part of our, I've heard it several times, part of our concern is it feels like we're having rules and BMPs developed for serious non-attainment areas driven down to a moderate area, which is us. And, you know, our understanding of the Clean Air Act is that it does allow for variations between different areas. It could be based on, you know, the cropping patterns to a certain extent. It could be based on a lot of different things, and one of them being whether it's a serious or a moderate. And it has a feeling that this is going to be our standard for Arizona. because honestly, we were ready to go with this thing back in the early 2000s. And man, we had the rule was submitted by ADEQ in 2008 in August and withdrawn in 2008 in August. And then, because we had a clean finding, but instead of getting the SIP approved, we withdrew it. And we get and understand we have to have something to get a SIP that's acceptable by the EPA. We want to make certain that it is no more restricted than it needs to be, because the discussion will be, we'll go in, we'll do the exceptional events, and unlike the other areas you talked about, you can look at the Yuma area and pretty much the failures have been during the exceptional event. I know the 5 years you're looking at, you say there's 9 that didn't qualify as exceptional event, except out of 8 of those 9, the primary wind speed monitor at the air base was either totally not operational or not operational for part of the day. So we had to use monitors elsewhere. But over the history, we've looked at it and we've seen that basically that's what it is. It's exceptional events. It's a wind speed of 25 miles an hour. So we understand we got to have the SIP though, but before we can get that. We can get the exceptional events. So we want the SIP so we can get the exceptional event, we can get to be an attainment, and life can go on. But we don't want to be sitting here, downstream and saying, okay, great, well, now we're in attainment. Do we really need to have to do all this onerous reporting? And again, we don't really know what type of reporting we're talking about, because at Yuma County, we've had the reporting, we sent it out to the members, said keep it on file, probably not up to date, I will grant that, but it's like ADEQ walked away from it, everyone, not top of mind, everyone forgot about it. Yeah, we need to do a better job there. But we, if we sit there and we're in attainment, we said, okay, we don't want to do the reporting anymore. What's going to happen? And you guys know it, is that we will go back to EPA, and EPA will say, well, if we don't report, how do we know that you're not going to go back into non-attainment? You're in attainment now. If we take that away, you might go into non-attainment. So there's that balancing act of how much, because whatever we agree to is forever. It really is. And that's the concern. So, I think the definitions need to be looked at in detail, and an agreement come through there. And then we need to take a look at some of these other things, that may or may not make sense. It's interesting to me when I look at, the construction BMP and I look at the ag BMP, they have the same deal for control and dust on site. And then they talk about vegetative cover and everything else. I don't know about you all, but I haven't seen much vegetative cover on any construction site. Usually they're tearing everything up, so again, that's part of that whole, it has the feel of a cookie cutter. Let's get this done, wham, bam, we're going to roll through it. There's things in here that are absolutely we can live with, and things that we do and that we should get credit for. And I know we have been, because that's part of the reason why the ag numbers dropped in the bottom so significantly, is that you've taken that into account. We appreciate that.
Harold, I'm looking at definitions just to cover your point. So in the old rule, we have cover crop, we have critical area planting, we have cropland, we have permanent cover, we have organic material cover, we have sequential cropping, we have residue management, all set up as different stuff. That's one practice with different materials. There doesn't need to be 10 of them. And that's part of the confusion and the pain. It's just ridiculous.
You're right, Bobby. That's part of the thing that, if we're serious about wanting people to do certain things, we need to say cover crop and then give them multiple examples of what it entails, you know, on that. I mean, it's just, I want the things to succeed. I want to get to, I say I want to, we want to get to an attainment status. We firmly believe that the only way to an attainment status is going to be by the exceptional events rule. But we're in a catch-22 in that the EPA won't accept an exceptional events declaration unless a SIP is on file and improved. And so we've got, there's that balancing act that's in there.
That's not true,
But
Harold.
this is, to me,
Harold?
is that not true? Yeah.
No, no. So the way it works is if your reasonable control rules are approved into the SIP and meet Clean Air Act requirements, that is, they're shown to be sufficient to demonstrate attainment, then generally they will, by default, be considered reasonable controls, or as EPA puts it, they will defer to those rules as constituting reasonable controls. But you can have reasonable control rules that are not approved into the SIP, and as long as you can demonstrate to EPA that they constitute reasonable controls, then you can have them.
I didn't know that, Steve. Thank you.
To account for exceptional events, yeah.
I
It's much easier. So obviously you
I
want to
know
get
the
them
push is we
approved.
got to get a SIP. Okay. That's the push.
Yeah.
But we want to make sure that the SIP for Yuma is, in our mind's eye, it should be significantly different than Pinal and Maricopa, just because we're not a serious.
So we understand that what we need are specifics. I mean, we've heard many times now that we need differences between Pinal County and Yuma. And, you know, as I said at the beginning, we are more than willing to entertain that, but we just need specifics.
Well, that's why we sent you in writing the stuff that just to start.
Right. But we haven't spent very much time. We've spent a lot of time, forgive me, but we spent a lot of time kind of going over general complaints about the rule and very little time so far. And we're almost at the end of our 2-hour meeting going over specifics.
Yeah, but again, the details in the definition, you know, because that way everyone understands, including the EPA, of what we're talking about when you say
right. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the problems with the existing definitions from EPA standpoint is there wasn't enough detail. You couldn't really tell what was, and I'm sorry if cover crop and sequential cropping, and I don't remember what the other items on the list are the same thing and don't need to cover multiple times. It was a feature of the existing rule. We didn't add those. We changed the definitions to make them more specific, but and just as a layperson, very much a layperson when it comes to agriculture, reading those two, I couldn't tell that they're the same thing. They seem pretty different to me, but if there is a way to simplify this by consolidating some of the definitions, we would love to do that. We would love to make the rule simpler.
Yeah, let's come back to that in about 10 minutes during the call to action. But before the conversation gets too far afield, Heather, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, it was essentially just echoing what Steve said. You're the most familiar with your crops, the land that you're working on. So we definitely love that specific feedback once you can provide that, so we can take a look and compare it across other moderate areas to make sure it's meeting those expectations. So please, I know we're asking for a lot to get your feedback, but it's going to make for the best version of the rule. So if you could please provide that we can take that under consideration.
We can surely sit down and look at the definitions and go through that aspect, and go in and make our update and modify what we think they should be, okay, and get it to you to look at. you know, there's things that we don't understand too. You know, they talk about, you know, sections D, you know, D1, D2, D3, D4, and then A, and then the D2B, D2B, all of those, and you kind of read through them. But then the question comes to mind when I look at tillage, you know, and I look at the 11 items that are in tillage, I can see most of my growers using every one of those tillage practices for a specific purpose for different crops for the entire year. Okay, not for every crop. You know, there's no such thing as transgenic lettuce. Transgenic cotton, absolutely. So I could see where they would use all that type of stuff. But then when you do that, then what do we have to do about B on that whole list?
Right. So yeah, that's one thing. We were discussing that actually earlier today, that the structure of the rule could be clearer. So the intent is that if there is an item on A that is a BMP that can be implemented every day, right? That no matter whether there's an advisory or not. So say, for example, you're implementing transgenic crops.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's not on both lists. Let's take one that's on both lists. So let's go with conservation tillage. So say you're implementing conservation tillage already, that's your day-to-day BMP, and there's an advisory, a PM-10 advisory, then you're already satisfying B because you're implementing one of the things on the B list. You're not obligated to implement an additional measure from the B list if what you're doing on A
would be something along the lines, okay, I use conservation tillage on my permanent crop, alfalfa, which is in for 3 years, and I come back in and I, what they call renovate it, to help strengthen the plant to grow, but that's just alfalfa, and that's 200 acres of what I've got. I've got 800 acres of other stuff, you know.
Sure.
How does this all fit together? See that?
Well, so the intent is that you would wherever the BMPs differ, you would specify that on the form, and we can try to make that clear in the rule, but we try to, you know, by saying we tried to make it clear, and I think it probably could be clearer, that you can specify different BMPs for different time periods and different areas. If it also needs to specify different crops, you know, we can add that in. Or if there is some other way that we can make that clearer, we're obviously open to that. But the intent
would that be an operational plan? In other words, Harold Maxwell Farm, I'm gonna have so many acres of citrus, so many acres of alfalfa, and by golly, I'm gonna even try to grow some produce this year. You know, and so I come in and say, for my produce operation, here's my tillage BMPs. For my citrus operation, here's my tillage BMPs.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would, and then that gives you the flexibility. You don't have to come down to where you're saying, well, the 40 acre at 3.5 E and 32nd Street is, you know, you're not asking to be that specific. You're actually really asking for a ranch farm plan. Is that what we're asking?
I mean, as long as it's true that you're using the same, let's say the same tillage BMP, namely multi-year crops, everywhere that you're growing alfalfa,
right?
We can set the form up in such a way that you could state, everywhere that I'm growing alfalfa, my BMP for tillage is multi-year cropping.
Because, you know, if you're, now let's just take produce. Typically what happens is you would start out east where David Sharp's at, and you know, your XYZ produce company, they're growing produce there. And then midwinter, they're back close to the river in Yuma, where it's a little warmer. And then they go back out somewhere out where David Sharp's at again. And so they'll all have, the produce group will all have the same basically operations done, but the ground will be moving around. And then from year to year it changes, because you know what, guys, you don't put the same crop back on the same acres year after year after year. That causes all sorts of disease problems. But it gets rotated, but it's all part of that whole plan, you know. So if we could have it by, this is what we do with our crops. Forget about the acres, forget about where they're located, but for XYZ farm, this is our plans. This is what we're doing for that. That becomes a more workable type of solution. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. If we did it by crop, it would be so easy, because there are a certain set of things that we do for each individual crop. I was just looking at the to eliminate BMPs from cropland on the new sheets, and there's listed 4 different types of crosswind soil stabilizing. Well, why do we have to go to the minutia? Crosswind ridges, crosswind strip cropping, crosswind vegetative strips, crosswind bed stabilizing. You know, if on that, it's to reduce the wind from disturbing soil particles from the furrows. So if we put them up crosswise to the wind, unless we're trying to explain every little detail of what we're doing, we've got to allow people to, as I say, use their common sense.
Yeah, right. And I think, Bobby, we could have some of those discussions in there. It's the same type of discussion we need to have about, applying water when significant earth moving is happening. See, that there's a difference between construction and agriculture.
Exactly.
In construction, you want to compact the soil. You want to get a firm base. In agriculture, that's the bane of agriculture. We work to take compaction out of the soil. So if you're looking at how you're reducing dust by working it too wet, you're causing us, to do multiple tillage passes that probably produces more dust than working it drier. This 50% number of capacity, that's pretty healthy. I mean, you could get sand to stick together on that, and that's kind of, I've done the rivet test. I do it all the time. I did it in Africa, matter of fact, just to see what the soil was. And when you start building a ribbon, it tells you not only how much moisture is, but how much clay you have in there. And the clay is a real concern about making bricks. And so, we've got to be able to, the guys that are doing this for agriculture are doing it for a different purpose than construction. And they both have the reasons for what they want to do, and they both are right in there. But we don't want compaction. We want to keep soil tilth and health going. David, you're the one that does the most as far as land living, that type of stuff. Am I off base on this?
Well, at the moisture levels they're suggesting, if you're doing construction, that's great because you're gonna pack the soil. But if I was to move soil at that kind of moisture, then after it's done, I'm going to have to go back in and do a whole bunch of tillage to loosen that soil back up from the compaction. And then guess what? I'm going to find out that it's not level, because at that level of moisture, you don't.
You've
doesn't
affected
doesn't stay in the same place as you want it to stay.
Correct. I mean, if you're trying to do that, you've changed your cut fill ratio, because sands, every soil compacts at a different level. And when you have mixed soils, once you throw water on it, the shrink swell effect will take place, and then you have to re-level it again because it's not going to be flat.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was hoping we would have time to ask for some specifics regarding the soil moisture issue, but for the sake of time, since we only have 5 minutes left, I think we'll need to discuss that offline. But yes, that is something we want to discuss. As far as having an option on that menu to allow folks who want to use watering as a control, and we can dial in how much water, but having an option for watering, sorry, Heather, for stealing your thunder, it makes that menu more flexible. So we're hesitant to remove anything in the way of a BMP unless we're positive that absolutely no one would want to use it. But we are interested in learning more about how we can dial it in so that it makes the most sense for Yuma in particular.
Yeah, and I think that was the big deal with that percentage of field capacity, is that everyone felt that was really, really wet, detriment to the soil health and everything else. And
yeah, let's talk about that offline. Thanks.
You got it.
Yeah. Gentlemen, I apologize for my blowing up at you, but it's out of pure frustration. We have spent just numerous hours on this, and we want to get this across the finish line, but it's got to be acceptable. And we feel like that you really haven't paid that much attention to all the hours that we spent discussing all of this, and you're just cutting and pasting from Maricopa and Pinal County, and we have a hard time with that.
I respectfully disagree. There are some changes in here that we hadn't bounced off of you previously, and that's the purpose of the current review. But a lot of these changes, I would even say the majority of these changes, are, if not entirely based on conversations that we've had previously, are largely based on conversations that we, which is to say ADEQ, and in particular the Yuma Farm Bureau, have had previously. Otherwise, we would have left a lot of the things that don't exactly match the current rule language the way they have been. But because you've already provided us feedback on how we can make certain specific changes in a way that will satisfy what EPA is asking for, but will also make sense for the area, we've been able to proceed with those changes. Wherever we've done that in a way that either we've misunderstood or where, again, any of the additional changes that we hadn't bounced off of you previously don't make sense, we want to address those, preferably before we go to formal public comment, as Steve was describing at the beginning of the discussion. But a lot of these changes are based on discussions that we've had, especially over the past 5 years. And that's not to discount all the work that you had put in previously, but as Steve noted, the rule has, the existing rule, not this draft rule, but the one that's currently on the books, hasn't been updated for a very long time. And so we do appreciate all of the work that y'all have put in to figure out what works for the area. But the fact is, until the rule is updated, we can't take any credit for any of those changes.
Well, Adam, if you're agreeable to it, take a look what we submitted, prior to this meeting. And if take a look there, and if you think we can agree with some of these comments we made there, let's put that into the rule. And if you send it back to us, then we'll just sit down, and I know how to use red letter, so I can take it and I'll type in, and say, hey, we're concerned about this, and we'll do it in red letters. So it's real visible, and see if we can get this thing pushed along, because we're tired of messing with it.
Yes.
We think we believe that if we get this done, we're going to be able to get into an attainment ruling, you know, based on what we've seen over the years, you know, over the decades we've been on this. And so it would be good for all of Yuma County, not just agriculture, but for all of Yuma County if we could get to that level. And we'd be more than willing to do that if that is agreeable.
Could you send out the mailing to where I can change it in Word? And I'm willing to go through and spend a week at my computer and put in things that I feel need to be done. But it would be easier if I could just take the document and make edits to it in the computer. Is that, can you do that?
Yeah, that's absolutely something we can do. That's not a problem.
Well, sorry,
and-
hang on, Bobby. Can you clarify what you mean by mailing?
Well,
Excuse me.
Draft rule, or do you mean
The materials you sent us today, because that's the same thing we're going to discuss on the 24th. Is that correct?
yes, that's correct. That's what I understood you to mean, is the draft rule.
Yeah, yeah, just this stuff so I can play with it, because
yeah, we can make the draft rule available in Word form. I would suggest that, as I was indicating at the beginning, I have a version that now already has Harold's comments incorporated. So I think it would make sense to include those.
sure.
And
And that way it could be sent out on the computer, and we wouldn't, you know, we could all look at it easily.
right. I think to make sure that it's available to all stakeholders, what we would do is we would post it as an additional version on the website, and we'll let you all know.
That's
Okay.
I mean, you know, more people looking at it, they're gonna come up with stuff that we're gonna miss. I guarantee you.
Well, sure. Sure.
All right, we're already over time. Out of respect to who's ever stuck around this long, let's call it for now. A reminder to please send anything that you would like in the way of written feedback or questions to airplanning, all one word, airplanning@azdeq.gov. And since there's obviously more conversation to be had, to register for that second workshop on this topic, if you haven't already, on the 27th, is that right?
Was it 27th?
24th, I believe.
Yes, thank you. No, it's on Monday the 27th is the second.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. You're exactly right. I was looking at the wrong meeting. It's on.
I feel for you.
Well, no, sorry, it's not the 24th either. Is it the 20th?
Adam, you are correct for the ag rule. The second meeting is going to be the 27th.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at construction. Yes, on the 27th.
The construction is on the 21st.
So sorry for the confusion.
Or the 20th.
So hopefully folks are available on the 27th to continue discussing. But
Yeah.
in the meantime, please give us whatever you can via email.
Lizzie, stop it.
And yeah, we'll put up that Word version of the draft rule. Steve, Heather, Jackie, anything to add? You're on mute, Steve.
I just wanted to apologize. I was on mute because I was trying to prevent my basset hound from contributing to the meeting.
They're stubborn, aren't they?
Yeah, and I wanted to apologize for her earlier contributions.
Well, thanks for unmuting me too. I was frustrated for a while.
She sounded like us.
Well, thanks again for all y'all's input and for sticking around. Sorry for keeping you late.
The
There's nothing
least of
else?
our problems.
Well, we'll see what we can do. Thanks again.
You bet. Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all.